The early to mid 2010s was the worst time to be a Nintendo fan ever, and it was all thanks to the Wii U. This thing was one of the most embarrassing failures of all time. Not because it had no games, no, look at this. It's for a lot of reasons. It was marketed way too much to the casual crowd, horribly underpowered, and my favorite, the gamepad. This thing is tacked onto every game for the sake of a gimmick that usually hurts the experience. Besides being way less powerful than other 8th generation consoles, devs were essentially forced to use it, meaning anytime the Wii U got a multi-platform release, studios had to put in way more work for the gamepad you know they didn't want to do. So many games just used it for menus or inventories. They're not designing a whole different control scheme just because you got 2 screens. Really, the only people utilizing the gamepad were indie studios. Since these guys are way more experimental, there were a lot of games that used the gamepad in admittedly fun ways. This was also around the time of the early to mid 2010s indie game explosion, where indie studios dropped god-tier games left and right. But this was also around the time of the early to mid 2010s ways to make money off the internet explosion, where the rise of crowdfunding websites made it exponentially easier for indie creators to fund their work. Some of the biggest indie games of all time were crowdfunded. That said, a lot of these were from Kickstarter, which, if you don't know, doesn't really have the best reputation. You can literally find YouTube channels dedicated to all the scams and ridiculous shit from that site. So it's not exactly a high honor to be on Kickstarter. Tons of Kickstarter games either fell through or came out severely underbaked because of poor management, unrealistic expectations, or the devs just giving up. So today I want to talk about a game that not only suffered from all 3, but had one of the saddest deaths I've ever seen ever. All because of the devs' obsession with the Wii U. This is the story of Hex Heroes. Quick thing before we get started, one of the subjects in this story is Viga Castaneda, the game's creative director. During the production of the game, Viga went by a different name, which you might see in some articles or interviews. I'm still going to refer to them as Viga, but I wanted to bring it up just in case there was any confusion. Our story begins in the early 2010s. Chris Yenavine and Viga Castaneda were getting their computer science degrees from CWRU. They became friends because of their shared interest in video games, mainly Nintendo. They do further education at UAT, where they apply this interest into their studies. Chris did game production and management, and Viga did 3D modeling. After that, they started their own studio called Prismatic Games, with their flagship title, and only title, being Hex Heroes, the world's first party RTS. Party-S for short. They got the idea from a game jam in 2013 and felt it had a lot of potential. Viga was the creative director and Chris took care of management. And thankfully, they already had a foot in the door. Viga was the artist for another indie game called The Bridge. I never played it, but I heard it's really good. Alright, let's talk about this Party-S stuff. So, Hex Heroes' main gimmick was dividing common roles in RTS games to everyone playing. But since it took advantage of the Wii U's asymmetric gameplay, this also depends on which controller you're using. For players using Wiimotes, their perspective is on the TV. They start by choosing between 2 of the game's 8 classes, each with their own stats and abilities, and that combination would determine their playstyle and role. For example, the rogue is good at stealth and the archer has ranged attacks, so if you combine them, you'd essentially be a sniper. The players then spawn onto the map and collect resources and do objectives. The player on the gamepad is the commander. They have a bird's eye view of the map to oversee production, spot enemies, and communicate. They're also the only ones who can see the player's stats. There'd be small indications on the TV, but for actual health points and resource count, that was strictly on the gamepad. Chris and Viga split up the roles to make Hex Heroes friendly to all skill levels. Like, more experienced players would choose offense classes, like the Knight, and newer players would choose support classes like the Woodcutter. They used the game Savage as a comparison. In that game, one player is elected as president and issues commands to the rest of the team. As someone who's barely played RTS games, this honestly sounds pretty fun. Look, I've wasted 10 years of my life on TF2, so the class gimmick sounds interesting to me. They even used TF2 as a comparison, with making support classes fun. Prismatic then reached out to Nintendo to join their indie self-publishing program. They liked what they saw and production began in March of 2014. The Kickstarter launched a few days later with the first trailer for the game, and to be honest, it doesn't look too good. It gets the point across, but the trailer is really thrown together. The music's compressed, the footage is boring. I could do a CinemaSins counter for everything wrong with it. But that didn't really matter, cause to be honest, this game had insane marketing. Tons of press from gaming websites like Nintendo Life and Polygon. Vega went on Digino Gaming back when they had guests, and they got Grant Kirkhope to do the soundtrack. They also involved the backers in a lot of the development. They chose the last 4 classes, one of which was a backer's idea. They pitched ideas for mechanics and monsters. They even got to design t-shirts for the game. But the biggest thing were the cameos. These were cosmetic skins of characters from other popular indie games. Shovel Knight, Juan from Guacamelee, Rusty from SteamWorld Dig. Nintendo actually put them in contact with these studios to buzz up the game. And so they said, hey, let's just make this a huge crossover. That always gets people's attention. And it did. If a fan of Shovel Knight saw they were in the game, they're gonna check it out at the very least. If they think it looks cool, they'll most likely donate. If not, they'll tell their other friends who like Shovel Knight to check it out as well. The fact people were talking about Hex Heroes was more than enough, and that was especially the case when they announced the Game Grumps as cameos. What could have been? Apparently, Vega and Chris got their contact info from a fan and reached out with the game concept. They liked it and agreed to have Aaron, Danny, and Ross cameo. Vega was actually a huge fan of Game Grumps for a while. Look at these figures they made of them. Not every cameo got in. They also wanted Shantae, Raz from Psychonauts, and Steve from Minecraft. This was still when Minecraft was the biggest thing ever, so having Steve in Hex Heroes would have been astronomical. What was their plan? They asked their fans to e-beg Notch into saying yes. Prismatic knew what they were doing with the cameos. Like I said, even if someone wasn't into RTS games, seeing recognizable characters is enticing. It's the same thing that happens with Smash Bros. Before we move on, let's circle back to the articles I mentioned. Outside of these, there aren't a lot of interviews or press with Vega or Chris, so these are the only way to get a feel for their personalities. And I could just be reading into it too much, but there's a lingering aura of smugness that only the most elite of Nintendo fans can muster. You got obligatory trashing on COD or other AAA series, an undying allegiance to Nintendo, and lastly, some old-fashioned entitlement. You be the judge if I'm overly sensitive, but it frames a good picture of where this story's heading. These guys really wanted Hex Heroes on Wii U. They'd constantly go on about the asymmetric gameplay and how no other console replicates the experience. So what do they do to drive this point home? Announce a PC release.
My brother is a computer.
Not even a week after the Kickstarter launched, the game went multi-platform. And this wasn't a port, but a revamped version with a stronger emphasis on online co-op over local. Your role also wouldn't depend on the controller, meaning if someone wanted to be commander, they could just volunteer instead of switching to the gamepad. It's obvious this was to get more people excited for the game. The install base for Steam was way higher than the Wii U's. The only problem, Prismatic really didn't want to do this. Their concern with a PC version was that it'd lose part of the experience, and constantly said Wii U was the superior version. And you know, maybe they're right. Maybe the PC version does lose something, but it feels like they're talking down to it, which wouldn't give me confidence as a potential backer. Tons of games have bad cross-platform releases. My Switch almost blew up last time I played Fortnite, but no one else seemed to care. The Kickstarter was successfully funded on April 23rd, 2014, the last day of its campaign. A few days later, Prismatic said to expect at least 2 updates a month on the game. They spent the summer fleshing it out in preparation for its first showcase at the Media Indie Exchange in 2015. By December, here was the state of the game. Programming for modes and other features was 60% done, designs for classes and enemies at 20, art like models, UI, and animation at 35. Grant Kirkhope was actually done with the soundtrack by then, so development was going pretty good. They still have a lot of work to do, but are estimating a summer release as long as the mix goes well. And it did not go well.
Why isn't this working? Is there something missing?
Within the first hour, Chris and Vega ran into a huge problem. The game they specifically designed for Wii U wasn't working on the Wii U. From what I read, they did most of their programming for Hex Heroes on PC, since it supported Unity 5 and then transferred it to Wii U. They knew this would cause problems since that just happens working cross-platform. But since Wii U didn't support Unity 5 at the time, the game was physically unplayable. Nintendo even sent them a special event Wii U for as much optimization as possible. It probably had more memory or power, but even that didn't work. In a last-ditch effort, they scrapped together a PC setup that kinda replicated the Wii U experience. Basically, one player was in the field on one monitor, and another was the commander on a second monitor that was obstructed to everyone else. And reception wasn't bad. According to them, attendees were vibing with the controls and giving positive feedback. But this obviously wasn't a good look. For the rest of 2015, they went hard on optimizing the game, both to have it actually run on Wii U, but also based off critiques they got from mix, including revamping the combat system, finishing the game's framework, updating the UI, adding more enemies, and a level editor. You can see a lot of this in the next trailer they dropped that October. It looks exponentially better than the first, and yeah, that should be expected, but this shows how much they've developed the concept and style over the last year and a half. Sadly, this meant the game was getting delayed to spring 2016, but going off what we've seen, maybe the mix incident had a positive impact. It seems way more fleshed out, the performance looks better, maybe some more time to bake was a good thing. Maybe things will be better at its next showing at GX3 in a few weeks.
That is defective equipment.
Sit down.
Just kidding, they had the same fucking problem again. Despite a whole year of development, the game still wasn't working on Wii U. They didn't mention if it was because of memory or Unity 5 support. I found an article that said the beta came out in 2015 on Wii U, but only for select third-party devs, and Prismatic definitely wasn't one of those selects. They did the dual monitors again, and to be fair, again, feedback was good, but remember, any compliments they got was for the PC version, not Wii U. The version they still claim is the superior way to experience it. I understand Chris and Vega had a vision. They saw something in the Wii U and their brains just clicked. But after the same thing almost cost them a convention twice, they should have reconsidered the plan. Like maybe focusing more on the version that actually works and people have shown a positive reaction to. And maybe it wasn't that easy. Maybe they had contracts with Nintendo or something that prevented this. I'm an ignoramus with the legal side of video games, so if I'm out of line, please just call me out. But it seems the biggest thing stopping them was Chris and Vega themselves. Because if you remember the comments, you can start seeing how their vision is getting in the way of the game. But like I said, people vibed with it. A couple critiques they got were commander role wasn't fun, it wasn't intuitive, and the combat system was boring. The biggest thing they got was an investor. This is huge for an indie game, especially ones that were crowdfunded. Hex Heroes raised a lot of money, but that amount was probably a lowball estimate and it went into everything. Marketing, development, art, the cameos. The more time they spent on the game, the more they spent on the game. As long as they kept their investor happy, they could spend way more time on it, adding more features, more characters, more maps, more everything. This meant another delay though, this time to, they really want to say 2016. Prismatic may have embarrassed themselves again, but they were more determined than ever to get Hex Heroes on Wii U. And with its next showcase at GDQ in a couple months, maybe they'll have it figured out.
Room for one more?
Nope, they learned nothing, it happened again. Same as before, PC version with the gimmicky setup, and once again, people were vibing with it, but remember, all the praise they were getting was for PC, not Wii U, so don't take it to heart. On the bright side, Chris and Vega met some people they considered hiring, and Hex Heroes got an honorable mention at GDQ's Best in Play. They're clearly doing something right, but this feels like a one step forward, two steps back problem. They'll show a new build and make honest-to-God progress, but time and energy is wasted on a version you still can't play on the console the game was designed for. It's already been a year since the mix and nothing's changed. The Wii U was just bad news, man. This thing was infamous for being terrible to program for. But it's another story for a game to shit the bed 3 times before conventions. It got so bad, Prismatic hired a team of devs to optimize Hex Heroes for the system. They found the size of the game required too much memory, meaning they had to rework the entire foundation. The team was finally able to get the maps working, but going off screenshots, it wasn't looking too good. It's a start at the very least, which is something they desperately need. Hex Heroes got accepted into the indie prize competition at Casual Connects the following month, and they really wanted the Wii U version ready as, in their own words, it will make it so much easier for players to get it as soon as they start playing. And did they finally pull it off? Did the world see Hex Heroes in its Wii U glory? I don't know. They didn't say. In fact, they didn't say anything for 3 months. This is another problem we're gonna see a lot. Prismatic would just straight up ghost their fans for months. I understand they're busy with development and don't always have a lot to share, but as you'll see, just a simple hello every week or two would have sufficed. It wasn't until a certain announcement from Nintendo that not only got them to talk, but marked the true beginning of the end for Hex Heroes. This was a reality Chris and Vega considered since rumors of the Switch started, back when it was known as the NX. But since the Wii U bombed, Nintendo was very eager to get the Switch out, and it took a lot by surprise, including our friends at Prismatic. They'd post on Kickstarter about how it'll affect Hex Heroes moving forward, and rest assured, it's still coming to Wii U. Not because of their rancid obsession. According to Vega, Nintendo was very persnickety with who got dev kits for the Switch, like only a handful of AAA studios got them. Unsurprisingly, Prismatic wasn't one of their choices, so for the time being, Hex Heroes wasn't coming to Switch. But that didn't stop them from thinking of how it could potentially work for the system. Control-wise, it'd be the same, since both consoles are near identical with their buttons and shit. But the biggest thing was how it changed multiplayer. Since the game was still using 5 players, it required 2 Switches to work. Prismatic wasn't sure how good connectivity between Switches would be, and network programming automatically adds at least another year of development. From then till the Switch's launch, they kept polishing the game. In an update from January 2017, they said the game was finally running at a steady 60 FPS. They even teased more about a Switch port, stating, "We'll be back after Nintendo's Switch announcement on the 12th to discuss more about the platform." And to top it off, the release date was pushed back again to later in 2017. By the way, this was the only update they gave from October 2016 to March 2017. Almost 5 months of silence. I bring this up because it was here that a majority of people were getting annoyed with Prismatic. They were getting called out hard, and faith in the game was dwindling. I want to give them just a schmither of fairness. I can imagine the Switch threw a lot of stuff in the air. A brand new console was on the way, and they weren't getting much info about releasing on it. Still, Prismatic could have given quick updates every once in a while to prove the game wasn't dead, because nothing kills reputation faster than silence. It's wacky Prismatic thought they'd get it on Switch so fast. Remember, the only credit they had was Vega's work on The Bridge, a game they didn't even develop. They kept going with the Wii U version, or what was left of it. Because Hex Heroes started its certification process in a few months, a lot of stuff was cut for deadlines. Classes, maps, game modes. Every game has to cut stuff, and Prismatic said they'd release it as free DLC, but this was pretty sad to see. The game lost a third of its content, went months without updates, but another thing fans didn't appreciate was their new release plan. As I've said 80 times now, Prismatic considered the Wii U version as the ultimate way to experience Hex Heroes. Well, now that wasn't the case. In their words, think of Hex Heroes on Wii U like a work in progress as we add more polish and balance for the Switch release. We also want to simultaneously launch Hex Heroes on Steam through their early access program. This would further enforce the idea that the game is being tweaked, balanced, and updated frequently. I know I said they should have abandoned the Wii U version because it didn't work, but I think it's even sadder the game's on life support as a glorified beta test. Most of the backers donated because of how hyped up it was for Wii U, and yeah, they're still gonna get it, but it's not being treated with respect. Look at this behemoth of a comment. Mans was not happy. And what does Prismatic do in times of peril? They go silent, this time till January 2018, almost a full year later. And they're not doing good. Development slowed down because everybody they hired had to finish another game. In fact, they only had one dedicated programmer at the time. They got rejected for a Switch dev kit, didn't explain why, but go figure. And people were livid and started asking a lot of interesting questions. Why wasn't anyone else working on the game while the devs were finishing their other project? Why haven't we gotten a build despite having an investor for almost 2 years? What happened with the certification process? And just like that, the rallying for refunds began. It's a shame that's not how it works. Backers can only cancel their pledge or get a refund while the project is still live. If it's successful and has ended, it's no longer possible to get that money back. It's been transferred to whoever's in charge of the project. The only way you could potentially do it is by reaching out directly. But chances are by the time you're unsatisfied, the money's been long spent. You're not buying shares, you're not buying parts of a product or company, you're giving money to someone so they can finish a passion project. Another year of silence goes by and everyone assumes Hex Heroes is dead. Prismatic wasn't responding to criticisms or questions, the game was in a really bad state, there was just no enthusiasm at all. But out of nowhere, they dropped an update in June 2019 with not only a new trailer, but a new cameo for the first time in years, Hat Kid from A Hat in Time. Prismatic confirmed the game is still being worked on and wanted to use this update as a way of redeeming themselves. The community reaction was mixed, to put it lightly. Some were reassured by the new trailer, while others weren't as easily convinced, especially since, despite all the dumb shit that's happened, they were still releasing on Wii U. I don't know if it was passion or they still couldn't get the Switch dev kit, but remember, this was 2019. The Wii U was already dead for 2 years. There was no point in doing this since they were also releasing for Steam, a platform that's still thriving in 2024. By now, most of the backers sold their Wii U's, so there really wasn't much of a point. Hell, even Prismatic acknowledged the system was dead, but were still finishing it regardless. So most likely an act of passion. Prismatic could have just easily quit and left the game to die, but for some reason they felt obliged to finish it. Again, no incentives, but good on them for seeing this through. And hopefully nothing bad happens in the near future that'll cause even more issues for development. I really hope that doesn't happen.
I'm telling you right now, no, I'm about to put my foot down. It's over!
Unsurprisingly, COVID destroyed all the momentum Prismatic built up over the last 6 months. It started with them going silent for another year, which, I get, they had to figure out shit because of quarantine, but instead of talking about how it affected development, delays, whatever, the last couple updates are them adding shit no one asked for, like changes to buildings, commanderless mode, and no mention of a Switch release. It's good to know the game is still being worked on, but this all comes off as extremely vague, like why is this being changed? Who asked for this? Their last Kickstarter update was posted September 30th, 2021, with the same stuff we've heard 1,000 times. The game's wrapping up, a demo's almost ready for beta backers. Here's some new enemies you don't need. And maybe they had a bunch of new ideas for the game they wanted to implement before release. Maybe there's a reason they added all this seemingly needless crap. But why is this stuff getting attention when there's still tons of stuff we don't know about Hex Heroes? Like, there's been no mention of a story. Vegas said on Reddit the game modes had their own objectives and are loosely tied around a story, but what's the world called? Who's the antagonist? Is there a canonical reason for the cameos? Is this a Nicktoons Unite crossover where the characters meet for the first time? Or like Hyrule Warriors where it's a different continuity? And of course, the longer they wait, the less people are gonna buy it on Wii U. Especially since, and you probably saw this coming, Nintendo announced the eShop was shutting down in February 2022. It wouldn't officially close for another year, but that was the last nail in the coffin, final straw, end of the line, fork in the spoon for Hex Heroes. It was now physically impossible for it to be released on Wii U. After that, they just gave up. As of recording this, there hasn't been a Kickstarter update for over 3 years. They haven't said anything about the eShop closing, and both Vega and Chris deactivated their socials. Come to think of it, Chris just kinda disappeared. It always seemed like Vega was in charge of everything. They ran the Kickstarter, Prismatic's Twitter, did all the promotional stuff like Diginote Gaming interviews. Here's them doing the Ice Bucket Challenge. The last login on Kickstarter was August 26, 2024. It's been over 10 years since the game was funded, and it always seemed like we were so close and yet so far. And I'll be straight up, I believe Chris and Vega fully intended on finishing Hex Heroes, at least in one point in time. They were extremely passionate about the idea, and you can see that with how much they developed it over the years. I've seen a lot of people label it as a scam, and from a distance, I get it, but they would have had to go through a lot of trouble if that was the case. Hiring Grant Kirkhope, getting all the cameos, the conventions, but their passion is what ruined the game. At first they said it needed to be on Wii U because it takes advantage of the gamepad's asymmetric gameplay and all that crap. But since they were programming for a gimmicky, underpowered system, the game didn't even work. This caused years of delays, which caused even more delays because more shit kept getting in the way. Those delays caused uncertainty, and uncertainty caused silence, the biggest culprit in all of this. We'd go full years without updates, and the few we got towards the end were extremely vague and added nothing. It even seemed like people attached to the game were left in the dark.
I don't know what Hex Heroes is.
It's the dude who is making. I don't know if it's getting made anymore. Honestly.
Oh, okay.
The dude who was making us asked us to be in it forever ago, and I think I said yes, and I didn't speak for anybody else. But I think there was an assumption that everyone else was on board. Because I talked to Ross about it recently, and he was like, no, I don't know. It says I'm going to be in it, but I never said yes to that. I don't know. I don't think it's ever coming out.
All right, fair enough.
So,
looking at this story in the big picture, it's not the most insane, scandalous shit. It's just kind of sad. Chris and Vega really wanted Hex Heroes to be something. Again, I could tell there was passion, but its fate was in the air so much no one knew if it'd ever be released. In fact, I've held off making this video for 2 years, because I thought they'd eventually come back and release the Steam version at the very least. Oh yeah, the Steam version just vanished, despite people saying positive stuff about it at conventions. Nope, just never happened. They had every reason to ditch the Wii U after like 2019, but they never did. So here we are in 2024. Vega and Chris are off the internet, Prismatic is dead, and from right under our noses, another game called Hex Heroes released on the Google Play Store. It has no affiliation and looks like some malware shit, but at the very least I can play it. In fact, there's also another Prismatic Games on Roblox. I thought it was them when doing research. It's not, but I just thought it was funny. Do I think Prismatic will ever finish the game? Nah, definitely not. I feel at this point everyone's just moved on. The fan base is non-existent, their reputation isn't too great. Also, I don't know if they could still do the cameos. A lot of studios they got characters from went out of business during production, and I doubt the ones still around even remember Hex Heroes at all. So next time you think about donating to a crowdfund project or just anything online, remember to take it with a grain of salt. No matter how organized, well-intended, or fleshed out the idea may seem, it all comes down to the people running it.